Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing The Medieval Art of Love, Objects and Subjects of Desire by Michael Camille. I'm not sure why this author sounds familiar, but the author sounds very familiar, but I did enjoy this book. This is a fantastic book that has a lot of, as the subtitle says, objects and subjects of desire. The author takes a look at love, courtly love, chivalry, as well as some of the more practical aspects of love and marriage, which in many cases wasn't a love marriage on both sides in a medieval context, and primarily through art or objects that depict it. So we have lots of art throughout this book and lots of objects or like artifacts that can be seen. And this is on every page. This was a fantastic read, an absolute stellar find. I loved it. I gotta be very careful because there's definitely stuff in this book that I don't know if what I'm allowed to show on YouTube. It's all art, so it's all fine. But yes, this book was absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to be talking about the outline and the structure of this book, as well as some things that I found interesting or just fun things that I learned throughout this book. And throughout this video, if you find things that you find interesting or would like to share anything, please leave in the comment section down below. I love receiving your comments. They are my favorite part of making YouTube videos, is hearing back from other people. So the book has 5 sections and an epilogue. Well, there's an introduction called Love's Lost Relics. Then there's chapter 1, Love's Looks. And this is obviously the most important part because a lot of people fall in love based on look. I mean, we have phrases, love at first sight, and they truly believed in the medieval period that you had to see someone. And they also believed the mechanism by which you saw was actually something leaving your eye. So looking was very important. And there were even theories that people who are blind couldn't fall in love because you couldn't properly see. Chapter 2, Love's Gifts, so things given in love. 3, Love's Places. We'll get a little bit more into that. Places where love took place. Chapter 4, Love's Signs, and then chapter 5, Love's Goals, and then Love's Decline and Love's Renaissance. So again, there is kind of 2 aspects here where there's this idealized love, like how things should go, but throughout this book, there's also things that actually did happen, so maybe arranged marriages, and in some of these contexts, love is like this idealized version, which might not ever come to fruition, or just poets talking essentially. And then on the other side, there's the aspect of like, okay, this person is going to be married off for a political arrangement, and maybe between them they did find a way to have love, but my understanding is that, and I think this is common knowledge, throughout most of human history, love was not something that played necessarily a role in choosing your life partner. It was more of an economic and, for a lot of people, political decision that you would make. It wasn't a decision you would make based on love. It would be someone that you'd try to find to build a stable economic unit of a family. Although I'm very sure that people throughout human history have fallen in love and gotten married as well. There just seems to be 2 aspects throughout this book. So I'm just going to go through and find and just comment on some things, and I'll give the page numbers that I found interesting. Really, there was so much to find interesting, I started to have to like wrap it up when I got towards the end of the book because my notes were going to be too long. And there's a lot of places throughout this book where I thought how different some things were, but then how familiar. And the first one is on page 27, which I'm going to go, and that's Love's Looks. So again, looking is very important. And there's this whole section at the beginning talking about commissioning of portraits, or there is a poet who falls in love with a portrait or a 3D image of the person that he's in love with. And it's very important to like keep looking at your beloved, to like keep looking at the person that you're interested in is very important. And I thought today, like how we do something similar, even though this sounds very silly, like can you fall in love with someone because they sent you a nice portrait, which was how maybe political or like high-ranking marriages would occur. Someone would get a portrait and be like, this is going to be your wife, or wow, she's beautiful, I want to make her my wife. We think, well, that seems very archaic because we'll just see someone in person. But how often have you gone through someone's Instagram to find all their photos and watch all their stories, or someone does that to you, or you know someone who does that? And so like we still do a lot of this like looking at pictures of the people we're interested in, even though we have many modern means. We just might actually be able to see the person we choose to marry before we marry them, unless we're on some sort of reality television game show, well, that's a side topic. So there's a lot in here about looks, which looks very important. Most people have to find someone attractive for them to eventually fall in love with them. So that was interesting. There is a whole section called She Looks at Him, and this is something reoccurring. So throughout the entire book, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the art, a lot of the artwork, a lot of the depictions are from the male gaze, or like the male view of how love should be. So men seem to be running the show. There are some things I'll point out. There's very, very few instances of like in this case, a woman looking at a man and falling in love at first sight, which I guess they just didn't, I don't want to say they didn't have the imagination, but I definitely remember receiving comments in my youth where people had told me like, oh, women don't look at men, and then looks aren't as important for women, which, given the number of thirst traps available for women to view on the internet, is not entirely accurate. But there is a whole section where they talk about how rare it is to depict things from the woman's perspective, and that is throughout the entire book. And when there is a flipping of this perspective, it is very notable because of how uncommon it is, and of course because men are writing everything. You have to think too, maybe this wasn't even malicious. Like, I'm sure there are plenty of men who had it out for women, but there also are plenty of men who probably just were writing from their perspective, like the poet writing about how he fell in love with her, maybe not considering or thinking what it might be from the other perspective. So there is that whole section that comes out at the very beginning, because it is going to be prevalent throughout the book. The people doing a lot of this work, the people depicting a lot of this, the people writing the poetry and the literature are going to be primarily men. Now, there is a little bit of an exception, or something that we talk about right away, which is some of the deities. So you have like the god of love, Cupid, but where, is it pronounced Ovid or Ovid? Where his influence was less marked, particularly in Germanic regions, we find Frau Minna instead being a depiction of love. And that is a feminine version because Liebe, the German noun for love, is feminine. So we have feminine nouns, so it's associated with a female figure, versus Cupid and the god of love. But then I also thought, like, what about Venus? But that wasn't really covered too much in this book. So we do have some areas where there are women, and women, though, throughout this book seem to be like the objects, and men are kind of projecting everything and doing everything a lot of the times to women. Again, there are exceptions. Voyeurism is also a huge thing throughout the Middle Ages that comes up again and again. People sneaking up on people in gardens, and there's even shorthands for these little trysts that occur. Here's just some more of the art. I realized I should be showing you some of the fantastic art. Then we move into chapter 2, which is love's gifts. So you could give gifts to your beloved, especially if you were high ranking. You could give gifts, combs, mirrors, stuff like that. There's this whole section at the beginning complaining that women were falling in love with men, with merchants, because of their wares, which if you spend any time online, you can find similar complaints about men who say that women won't love them unless they have a lot of money. Although I would argue, if a woman didn't like you until you pulled out your expensive wares, and all of a sudden she seems interested in you, she might not be interested in you, she might be interested in your wares via you. So you just feel like, I don't know. It's a tale as old as time is what I'm trying to say. We've been dealing with this for a while. So there is that whole section, which was intriguing. Lots of beautiful artwork again. There were sumptuary laws which were put into place which restricted who could wear what, because there was this idea that people of certain ranks should only wear certain things. However, women had a lot more freedom throughout this, and that was because it was believed that it was very important for women to look nice, to kind of keep their man chained to them. That was something along that. Here it is. Also, it is more fitting that a woman should chain a man to her by her pleasing attire than the contrary. That was something. So there was a little bit more freedom in how women could dress. But the sumptuary laws have actually were unable to be enforced. My understanding is primarily through, once you had like the Black Death and the plague, the lower classes could advocate for more freedom because labor was more scarce. That was like a whole separate thing. So we have sumptuary laws. There's also this idea that especially the courtly woman could just be idle. There's this whole section in a passage of a medieval love poem, Roman de la Rose, which is, I guess, very famous, where the woman is quoted as saying, "I am a rich and powerful lady, and I have a very good time, for I have no other purpose than to enjoy myself and make myself comfortable, to comb and braid my hair," which is my new morning mantra. I'll be saying that as my affirmation. I'm a rich and powerful lady, and I have a very good time, for I have no other purpose than to enjoy myself and make myself comfortable, to comb and braid my hair. So I just thought like that was interesting. Also, there are dramatic scenes on these gifts. In this one, it's a shield where it is labeled "you" or "death," which is quite dramatic. I really enjoyed that. Then we move on to the third section, which is Love's Places. These are primarily gardens in general. So gardens is where a lot of this took place. And again, this is where we see a lot more of the focus, a lot of the art, a lot of the poetry coming out of the higher classes, because I think if you were a peasant in the fields, you weren't going to be spending too much time in gardens, lounging around, meeting up with your lover. But we do have the idea of gardens that reoccur frequently throughout the medieval, I'm falling forward, in the medieval period. This piano bench I'm sitting on is not stable, and I haven't bothered to fix it, and it might be my undoing. There's also a lot of imagery around a tower, particularly the woman being in the tower and needing to fend off male advances the way a tower would be on a castle, and then there could be like invaders. Again, very much from like this, there's a repeat, in a lot of cases, there seems to be a lot of repeating of like the woman kind of just sits there. Again, like there's no, as we discussed at the beginning, there's not a lot of depictions of women looking at men and finding men attractive. I don't know, again, if that was a lack of the imagination or they just didn't imagine that women would sit and look at men and find them attractive, or that women were going to do a lot. They were going to like sit in this tower and then I guess men were going to come. But there were some very good pieces of art of like ladies in waiting beating back male advances, because it was seen as, you know, you gotta make sure the men don't make too many advances on you. So again, fantastic art throughout this whole thing. Finally, or Love's Signs was not the final chapter, but the final one I have notes on. So in this one, there's a lot of symbolism, particularly symbolism of the hunt. And this is one section where I felt like there was a little bit more depiction of women having agency. So under the hunt section, there's a quote that says on page 96, both men and women are depicted as falconers in medieval art, and the falcon itself could be used as a metaphor of either the lover, the lady, or even love itself in poetry of the period. When the lady is shown holding the bird of prey, as in the tapestry, there's a tapestry I mentioned, I'll show in a second. It usually means that within the amatory fiction, at least, she has her lover under her power. So there is a recognition that once women sink their claws into a man, they have a lot of power. So they're not, the men writing this fiction aren't quite completely immune to thinking that the women are not doing anything. So in this case, she has the falcon on her. However, the text does go on to say that just because a man has a falcon doesn't mean that he has control over the woman. So it's more if the woman has the falcon, she's perceived as being the one in control of the hunt, and because the falcon would go out on the hunt, you know. Again, just more art. Every single page has art, and that's probably taking the longest time to look through. Just all of this art. There's also, which I've heard this before, but it's good to be reminded, dogs were associated with men, while rabbits were associated with women. We have this beautiful piece of music where up here we see usually the woman will be depicted with her rabbit and the man will be depicted with the dog, and that's the usual which in that case you think about hunting, the dog is the pursuer versus the rabbit, which is essentially just a prey animal. Another symbol, the rose, that's still one that we associate with love. And then finally the heart. And there's a discussion about how the symbolism of the heart, the like little symbol, is not actually how an anatomical heart appears. So there's a lot of symbolism about love, and there's some discussion in this book about how we got to the point of having that stylized version of love. But the Germans, again, remember the Germanic regions had more of a focus on, they had the female version in Frau Minna, and having more female depictions, or at least in that specific instance, having like a female depiction in love. Also had this fantastic piece, which was women torturing men's hearts in the variety of ways. So if you get, I guess if you let your heart get out ahead of you, you have all these fantastical ways that women can torture. Frau Minna's power over men's hearts. So look at all the ways you can get your heart broken. Isn't that fantastic? In a nice little medieval art piece. This is just super fun. I spent a long time looking at this one, so I thought that one was very, very interesting. Also, this fantastic, look at this unique cut of a manuscript. I don't know if I've seen this one before. This is super cool. So overall, this was a really, really good book, heavily focused on art, but also had a lot of history in it as well. I had a fantastic time reading it, and I do highly recommend. It is, again, The Medieval Art of Love, Objects and Subjects of Desire, and it is by Michael Camille. Again, I can't recall how I know him, but because I don't think I've read any other books by him, but the name sounds so familiar, which means that either I have read a book and I haven't seen it, or it's been referenced in other books that I have read, his works. So this one was a very, very good success, I will say. It's one that I ordered from another library without knowing what it was, and when I got it, I was pleasantly surprised. I had a fantastic time reading this. It was very interesting to see things that are very different from the Middle Ages, but also seeing things that are exactly the same from the Middle Ages. So some things in human history stay the same, some things never change. So this was a really enjoyable book. I had a fantastic time reading it, and I do highly recommend if you're interested in the Middle Ages, in medieval culture, in the way that individuals interacted, or if you have an interest in medieval art and artifacts and objects from that period, this would also be a fantastic book for you to check out. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.